You're listening to USA Radio News.
Welcome back. We're talking politics. We're talking issues of the day. We're talking about the debate tonight, and we're going to do it in the next half hour with our Renaissance man. He is, of course, a great journalist, catches posts on Daily Kos. You can check him out on Twitter, MTC. You can check him out right here every Tuesday at 5:30 Eastern, 2:30 Pacific time. He's not only a great journalist, he is a great musician, playing late last night. Got the late night text. It's Mark Taylor-Canfield live from Seattle, WA. Mark, how are you?
Whoa, Jeff, I'm doing good. I performed one of my favorite music venues in Seattle last night, the Nectar Lounge, which is, great. It's a great event where they have a featured band, and then a lot of the best musicians in Seattle just get together and we kind of form ad hoc bands on stage and just jam all night. It's so much fun. So it's kind of a night for musicians who want to play with, and for musicians. And, oh my God, I broke all of the rules in terms of rock and roll, which I explained before, where Seattle's motto is actually, I need a drummer. Well, I had 4 drummers last night, and they're all ready to play. They're all like, yeah, Mark, we like what you do. Let's do it. And I went from thinking I need to build a drummer catcher, with a cage, and you just kind of drop on them, and then they feed them Jack Daniels and raw meat or something, and just Animal with the Muppets until they're ready to play. But last night, now I realize I don't need to chase them down the street with a net or anything. They're coming to me, so I don't know what to do with all these guys. I'm like, how do you do it with too many drummers? That's the first time in my life there's been too many drummers in the picture. But I want to give a shout out, if you don't mind, to my friend Rebecca Bird, because she has a mural unveiling just in about an hour from now. Today during an official ceremony at Children's Hospital in Seattle. So she's a very talented artist from New York City, but she used to live in Seattle and was also the lead vocalist in a band I was in after I first moved to Seattle called Lucid, that got some radio airplay on KEXP and other places. And so today, the members of that group, kind of the core members, are getting together for the first time in years, so that's going to be really interesting. We're all going to hang out together, me and my friend Dale and Stuart, the guitarist. And Dale Lloyd actually was also in that band. He was a producer, it was kind of his brainchild. And now he's running a recording label called And Or in Seattle, which works with some experimental music artists from all over the world, so he's doing some great stuff up here. And also, I wanted to give a shout-out to my colleagues and friends at Democracy Watch News who've been producing a bunch of podcasts lately, including one with you, Jeff, which turned out really well. It was a really great conversation we had with you. It's actually a 2-parter. So if people want to find out more about the sad state of modern media, but also a lot about Jeff and what he does, you can tune into the podcast. You can go to democracywatchnews.org, and it's also up at Libsyn and iTunes and Spotify and all those places. So it's a really, really interesting interview. Jeff actually makes a really great guest as well as a great host. So it's called Democracy Cast. That's our podcast. And so weekly, we've got a national press briefing where we invite guests on and we talk with journalists all over the world and interview interesting people like Jeff. So I hope people get a chance to check it out, the Democracy Cast at Democracy Watch News with Jeff Santos, yours truly right there.
Well, you're a great interviewer, Mark, and it was a real pleasure to do the interview. And if people then they can tune into to my interview.
It was
a really great interview.
Than our country and where we're going as media, because the media does deserve a lot of criticism. I mean, I don't buy into the whole fake news propaganda from authoritarians, but I do think that we as an industry and the media really needs to clean up this act in a lot of ways. Sometimes I'm still very disappointed when I watch corporate news network reporting. It's just so sad. They really kind of miss the whole point. They don't do a good job of informing people about what's really going on. I mean, there's a lot of people in this country who don't even know what the word impeachment means, and that's sad. I don't know what happened to teaching civics.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because this has been an issue that we've tackled over the last few days. there was an article in the Boston Globe on the weekly magazine that they have, and it was about just that there's teachers have taken it upon themselves. Civics has not been taught, at least in Massachusetts, since the early 1960s. And, the fact is that these teachers in 5th and 6th and 7th grade taken upon themselves to go ahead and actually try to educate folks on government and the responsibility, once you turn 18, to be a good citizen, whether you're talking about voting at 18 or whether you're talking about, involved in your community and how you can help it and so forth. These are all things that I think are important, and to learn whether you want to have a public utility that is managed by a nonprofit, or whether you just want to allow, a public utility to be privatized and to be increasing your electricity rates or whatever. I sat on a focus group. I couldn't believe this when I moved to San Diego, as an aside, Mark. And there were so few people in this focus group. I mean, I think they paid you like $20. We sat in this old classroom, and I was at the time I still am, about 6 feet, and these desks that were made for second graders. And they basically told us that the rates in San Diego were the highest in the country. And I'm thinking, hold on a second, this doesn't make sense. It's 70 degrees year round, but you have to import the electricity up your way from Seattle to San Diego, and it was PG&E, I believe. And the fact is that you don't need air conditioning, you don't need heat if it's 70 degrees year round. I mean, yeah, it gets colder at night, or sometimes it gets a little warm, but for the most part, what are you spending this on? And the fact that people don't rise up and form a revolution for those costs. Now, I don't know. It's been 20 years since I went into that. Maybe even more than that. But the fact is that this to me is outrageous, that people don't get engaged. I mean, it took, a free restaurant gift certificate to get maybe 5 people to this focus group. So there you go. That's the example, and people need to be more active, no doubt.
Well, there was a Pew Research Institute focus group here in Seattle about some of these issues, and they actually were paying people pretty well. So somebody's got, somebody understands that, it's worth, people's time is worth money, and you gotta compensate them for daycare and taking time off their job or whatever it is they're doing. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot. We've been talking about this at Democracy Watch News during our press briefings, just how uneducated actually some of the journalists are, unfortunately. Yeah. But, that's modern corporate media. They always focus on the horse race. They always focus on who's slinging mud at who and who's ahead in the polls and what's public opinion. And they forget sometimes that they're part of their job as journalists, and occasionally somebody, the Wall Street Journal or somebody, or Washington Post will come along and actually do a decent in-depth article. I do find that The Atlantic does some really nice in-depth articles about some of these issues. But, to explain to people, especially millennials who think that Richard Nixon was actually impeached. I was talking to some of the students at the climate walkout about that. And Nixon's name came out, and that was the guy that was impeached. Well, actually, he wasn't impeached. He resigned to avoid impeachment. Right. And there are all these subtleties. The whole big question earlier last year was, can you indict a sitting president? Well, that issue came up during Bill Clinton's term of office because of the Jennifer Flowers case and some other things that were going on. And I had already looked into this as an investigative journalist, and I knew that Georgetown University had put out a really nice research publication. They had spoken to law professors across the country about this issue and what the precedent was with the United States Supreme Court in past cases. And there is nothing in the U.S. Constitution or in any federal law or any other law that says that you cannot indict a sitting president. It's just a tradition. It's just something that people have chosen to do, but there is no legal restriction on that. And Miller could have pushed that. There are many things that could have happened with the process already that are slowly starting to dawn on people. But, first of all, we have to educate people about what the process is, what it means. I mean, what is Nancy Pelosi's position in this? Why is it that she has some authority in this decision and Schiff and others? Because they have responsibility due to their own committees and positions in the Congress, right? And there's a whole succession of procedures that have to be gone through before that you can actually begin impeachment proceedings against the standing president. But, there's a good article.
They could hold a vote. They could go right to Nadler.
The Washington Post just did a really good article about Johnson, Richard Nixon, Bill Clinton, and what the impeachment papers were. What were the indictments against the president? And charges except for tax evasion, I believe. It was abuse of power. That was the issue.
Yeah. We're talking with Mark Taylor-Canfield. Let me ask you this. We had just two of our contributors before you, Mark. I had come on, one on the education issue and one on the issue of housing, which are two issues we've talked about quite a bit. Now, I wanted to, because we haven't talked about this on the air for a while, Mark, but the public school teachers and how you fund the education systems, municipalities in your towns. How different is it from just, your friends in California or Oregon to the south or even Idaho to the east? It's rather unique. And is it solely a property tax? Or how is it actually funded, your education K through 12?
Well, this has been an issue that I've been covering for years, and it started with actually the state Supreme Court holding the state legislature here in Washington State in contempt for failing to follow the dictates of the Washington State Constitution, and the state Supreme Court's decision was that they were not adequately funding K through 12 education. There is no income tax in Washington State, which is why some businesses like Amazon and Google love to be here.
Sure.
But it's also a situation where you have to pass levies in order for your school district to get any funding. So every time you have to fund your school through these cycles of ballot measures, and that creates some problems because, you obviously have rich neighborhoods who tend to vote, to raise their property taxes. You are correct. That's how a lot of the schools are funded. Then poor neighborhoods and people who don't have much property, or may have, low voter turnout, they don't pass their ballot issues for these levies to provide funding for K through 12 education. So the state Supreme Court has been saying for years that it's an unconstitutional funding situation. It is one of the glaring holes in the progressive agenda for most public officials in Washington State, the fact that we do not have an income tax. We have the most regressive tax system in the United States for a so-called progressive state that voted, 80% in the primaries for Bernie Sanders. That's ridiculous. So the state legislature and the governor, and I have to include Governor Inslee in this because one of my criticisms of him was that he had called a special session in order to discuss tax breaks for Boeing to keep them from moving their, headquarters somewhere else or their operations somewhere else, although they already actually moved, I think, most of their corporate headquarters to Chicago years ago for these very kinds of reasons. But, instead of calling a special session to solve the crisis in funding for K through 12 education in Washington State, he decided to call a special session to bail Boeing out. It's typical big money politics, but it left the teachers wanting to walk out, so they had several strikes across the state in the last few years, and then some 24-hour walkouts, just to kind of bring attention to the fact that we need some funding for K through 12 education. If we really want to be proud of our state, we really need to fix our tax system. I don't know, Jeff, personally, this is a whole other story about why public officials who tend to be very progressive-minded on most issues in Washington State, I can think of one reason why. Imagine this, a Democrat runs for office on the idea that we're going to raise your taxes. We're going to bring in a state
that's the fear word, TAX. That's that Democrat.
So they've hesitated to do that, but it would be the right thing to do. And I think that the word now, Jeff, I would say, from a political consultant point of view, I would say that it's in the air now that it has to be done. So it will eventually. It's just that they're going to drag their feet as much as they can. But when you're living in a city like Seattle, that has, so the state has no state income tax, great, but the city of Seattle has a 10%, 9.8% sales tax. So pretty much anything but food that you buy is inflated prices in order to try to fund the state and fund state programs. Imagine trying to run a state without an income tax.
Yeah, it's crazy. This is what happens to our friends in New Hampshire as well. But let me ask you this: do you also have a scenario now? And this is more of a recent thing. The education thing has been for a long, long time. The issue of cost. We just talked about housing. Bernie Sanders has got a housing plan that has rent control as a part of this. What has happened with Amazon, and and to a lesser extent, sort of the whole Gates and Microsoft moves over the last say 20 years or 25 years, but more so the Amazon piece. The cost. I remember, and I think I told you this, at one time in the mid-'90s, not that long ago, I was looking on Capitol Hill in Seattle, and there was a one-bedroom apartment for $70,000. My God, I don't know why I didn't do it. I mean, at the time we were thinking about moving to San Francisco, but now I can only imagine that's probably $500,000, if not more. But it's been the advent of the powerful Amazon just basically stepping all over whoever is mayor and city council and so forth, and with the exception of your great socialist city councilor, Ms. Savant there. Otherwise, this just seems to be, they make the call and they get the yes. Talk to me about the differences when you first moved to Seattle and how much you paid to where it is right now.
Well, the rents are going through the roof in Seattle. They've been skyrocketing. The city skyline is changing by the moment. I don't even recognize my own neighborhood. There's so many new towers. There are cranes everywhere. I think, there are reports that other cities are having a hard time getting crane crews because they're all in Seattle. So rent control is another progressive issue where we have totally failed in the state because there's a Washington state. These are all the issues, by the way, that I would be hitting if I was running for governor. I don't know why candidates don't, but these are the glaring holes in the progressive ideal of Washington state is that, no state income tax, the most aggressive tax structure in the country, inadequate funding for K-12 education, and no rent control. Why? Because it's a state legislature bill that was passed, that was supported, of course, by a lot of Republicans and Libertarians who just said, no, we don't want rent control. We want totally free market, no regulation. So in the city of Seattle, we are bound by state law not to allow rent control, which is ridiculous. So it's another one of those issues where I just need to rant and rave a little bit every once in a while because nobody's listening. And I know that Bernie Sanders came to town. Judy DeCastro was a city council member. She ran on rent control for Seattle, okay? Bernie Sanders came to town when he was mayor of Burlington. That was quite a while ago. But he came here from Burlington, Vermont, to talk about rent control. And I remember at some of those meetings afterwards, when I would actually mention rent control at a meeting, there was like a hush in the room, like everyone's afraid to even really go there. And I don't know why. Maybe big pressure from, business and real estate. They definitely run a lot of things in Seattle at this point. Although it looks like we might be winning on trying to save the Showbox Theater, there are a lot of other major developments that have been going on where just whole neighborhoods are getting wiped out. So rent control is much needed in Seattle. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's maybe not quite as expensive as San Francisco or parts of New York, but it's getting there. And it would be not unreasonable right now for people to rent a studio apartment for over $1,500 a month, maybe $2,000 or something. That's not unheard of. That's kind of going rate. And that's for a tiny, tiny apartment. So people are settling for a lot less here than they used to. It used to be that people have pretty spacious apartments apartments in old Tony-style brick buildings, hardwood floors, and, people were living pretty nice. Now people are kind of cramming into small condos and small apartment buildings. So I remember visiting Manhattan and people showing me off their condos to me, and me thinking, this is tiny. This is like a tiny, tiny one-bedroom apartment, and they're calling it a condo and paying out
New York
prices.
City for you.
Well, now I'm seeing that in Seattle.
Yeah.
Very similar thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, there's this talk that, millennials don't need as much room. I'm like, if you have a lot of stuff, our George Carlin once said, we have too much stuff as a society, which I tend to agree with. Then, it's not going to change. I mean, I don't know if they think that millennials are going to weigh 100 pounds less than they did 10 years or 20 years ago. But, it's obviously developers want to get as many people to rent in the building. So they cut the walls down and they, cut them in half, and there you go. Let me ask you this, and before we have to roll here, is the same sort of excitement that you had for Bernie Sanders in 2016. What are you seeing in Seattle now amongst the college crowd, amongst those who are in their 20s? Is it still similar, excitement for Bernie? Has it tempered a little bit? Has it Elizabeth Warren getting a share of that now? Compare it, if you can, to where it was 3 years ago or 4 years ago, 2015, when it all sort of started up.
Well, there are those stalwarts, the diehards who just won't give up on Bernie and think he's the best thing since sliced bread. And then there's another cadre of people, and I think of it this way, like, Elizabeth Warren is a capitalist who talks like a socialist, and Bernie Sanders is a socialist who talks like a capitalist, so they're kind of a good team. I mean, they can kind of talk to both sides. I do worry that I don't see the fanfare. I don't see the big, huge fundraisers that I saw for Bernie Sanders last time, but I suspect, from what I've seen, that he has a well-oiled funding machine at this point, and a really good list of people who support him and are continually willing to give him small donations. So I'm not thinking that he's not raising as much money. I think it's just more of a routine now for them, to have this infrastructure. The other thing is that there is this backlash, I think, that I'm worried about, Jeff. This is just me personally. I can't speak for what other people are saying, but knowing that Elizabeth Warren is kind of talking like a progressive Teddy Roosevelt, trying to break up Amazon and Google, I can only imagine that Bezos and some of those folks are just raging, right now against her and Bernie Sanders, because they represent the anti-corporate
including his.
So I worry that they have a lot of funding sources in a lot of ways. Although for local races and state races, the state has really cleaned up its act in terms of campaign finance law in the last few years. Once the Democrats actually finally got a majority in the state legislature again, then suddenly increased voter registration and access to instant voter registration when you get your driver's license now, all these things, that open up democracy to more people. Which is always funny how the Republicans are always against something that gives rights to women or tries to open up the voting franchise. But anyway.
I hear you.
We've done. I applaud their courage for coming out during the debates, and I assume they're going to continue to do that, saying that a lot of the problem is the fact that we've given over the power in this country to major corporations, and they're running the government, they're running the media, and they're telling you what to think and trying to block things like universal health care, rent control, some of these issues, funding for education.
Yep, no doubt about it. Mark, great catching up with you, my friend, as we always do on Tuesday. Never enough time for us to catch all the topics, but thank you. Have yourself a good one, and congrats to your friend Rebecca as well. All right, I want to thank Johnny for producing this broadcast. Great producer there. You can catch him 1:30 to 3 before my show. Thank Mark Pacheco for allowing me the opportunity to do this. And Tony Lopes, too. Keep on fighting, folks. Watch the debate tonight. It's your civic duty. My name is Jeff Santos, and I gotta go.
This is the voice of the Greater Taunton Area for News 1530 AM and now W259DD 99.7 FM, WVBF
For comments and more information, call 781-834-4400 or visit ticnetwork.org.
Thank you for listening.
Coming up next from the Talking Information Center, please enjoy selected readings from The Week magazine. And as always, thank you for listening.
USA Radio News with Tim Berg.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has some strong words for Turkey.
Turkey is our NATO ally. Yes, it hosts millions of Syrian refugees and has a legitimate security concern about the situation in Syria. But Turkey's escalation of hostilities with the Syrian Kurdish partners who've helped the United States fight terrorism is completely and totally unacceptable. This violence needs to end.
Rudy Giuliani, President Trump's personal attorney, says he doesn't intend to comply with the congressional subpoena for documents, escalating his battle with House Democrats who were seeking records as part of their impeachment inquiry. Your final numbers on Wall Street: the Dow closed above 27,000 for the first time since July, gaining 237 points and closing at 27,025. This is USA Radio News.
An official message from Medicare.
It's open enrollment, Fred. Time to compare plans.
Oh, Alice, we're fine with what we have.
Well, that's what the Johnsons thought until they tried Medicare's new Plan Finder.
The Johnsons, huh?
We saved on our prescription costs.
And got extra benefits. Come on, Fred. Maybe we'll find something better.
Plans change every year. Use the new Plan Finder at Medicare.gov to compare health and drug plans. Open enrollment ends December 7th.
What do you know? Comparing plans really pays.
Career diplomat George Kent is answering questions behind closed doors in a House impeachment inquiry. Kent is a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State who oversees U.S. policy on Ukraine. This all stems back to a phone call President Trump had in July with the president of Ukraine. Mack truck workers strike for the first time in decades. With more on the story, here's USA Radio Network's John Hunt.
Mack truck workers are walking picket lines after their union launched a strike at plants in 3 states. The United Automobile Workers Union Local 677 began picketing outside Allentown, Pennsylvania. The company said the strike involves about 3,500 employees at facilities in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Florida. The union says many issues are unresolved, including wages, job security, and pension health benefits.
And you're listening to USA Radio News.